Welcome to Franchise Killer, a podcast where we pick movie franchises or wannabe franchises, review them film by film, and see where things went wrong. Or
right.
Or right.
Hey.
You'll have to eat vegetables
I don't know, I was trying to
become ascended like me.
I went the Michael Cera route. He's so soft-spoken. Has he ever... Yeah, no, never mind. Michael Cera. That was a poor attempt. And Noah, you did Brandon Ruth's character.
Yeah,
I take it, the
that
vegan guy.
It was such a good impression. I'm sure no one could tell the difference.
Well, for one, like, Brandon Ruth's not that huge of an actor. And two, Michael Cera's not really a thing anymore either.
Yeah.
So even if we did the perfect impression, I don't think anyone would be able to identify it. So anyway, I'm Reese. Across from me, we have...
David.
To his left.
Irina.
To my right.
Vegan guy?
Wow.
I don't
his name's
his
Todd.
Name. Todd.
Might as well be
Todd.
Chad.
I'm Todd.
Vegan Chad.
Vegan Chad.
Noah had one thing to research today, and it was to name a character's name in this. And
Hey.
Vegan guy.
I slipped. I couldn't think.
And doing a grind thinking down a bunch of stairs to impress some girls, we have...
AJ. Whoa. Whoa, looks like you're seeing double.
And the movie we're talking about is... It's the final movie in Irina's miniseries. It's Scott Pilgrim, a movie that came out in 2010, directed by Edgar Wright. Who's that guy, you ask?
Oh, I don't
knows?
know.
Nobody
Who
knows.
is that?
Well, let me remind you, he directed the movies Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, At World's End, Baby Driver, and most recently, Last Night in Soho. Guys, impressions on Edgar Wright's filmography. Are we fans?
Oh,
Yes.
Big fans, yes.
He's got a pretty,
He's got a solid history of work behind him.
I haven't seen his newest movie, but I really like this one, and it says something about him that I like all the other ones better. In my opinion.
Oh, really?
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is the bottom for you?
Yeah,
I mean,
and I
that's
love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I love it.
I would not put this at the bottom. I put this one. No, I'm going to say
Hey, yeah,
that. I'll
we're,
say that.
we're,
I'm
we're
going to say
jumping
that.
the gun here.
Yeah, very solid filmography. You should watch Last Night in Soho because I think that's his the bottom
His
for me.
I haven't seen it,
But
so
it's still good. Like all of his movies are
at
good.
least of the ones you listed, you said like Hot Fuzz and
Well, that's his.
He's a
all
competent
of his
Driver
filmography. Shaun of the Dead,
Shaun
Hot
of the
Fuzz,
Dead.
World's End.
He
Baby
started
Driver.
with Shaun of the Dead?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
he's a rock
Started
star.
strong.
I'll just personally say my favorite Edgar Wright, and it's Hot Fuzz. So,
That one, that one's up there.
but that's the sign of a good filmmaker when you can look at his filmography and be like, wow, none of these are bad. My favorite's this one. And the person next to you, they look at it and say, oh, none of these are bad, but they pick another one as their favorite.
Yeah.
And down the line. Like, I feel like almost all of us might have a different favorite Edgar Wright and all also acknowledge, like, oh, every one of these movies is good.
He didn't he start doing Ant-Man for Marvel?
Yeah, he was heavily involved in that one. And
then
up until, like,
there was creative differences or
yeah, I think it was like right before that movie started filming. And then
Edgar right before.
yeah, something happened, and Peyton Reed took over. Yeah, but that movie's still good. It survived, and I think it still kind of feels Edgar Wright-y at points. Anyway, moving along, the movie stars Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Kieran Culkin, Chris Evans, Anna Kendrick, Allison Pill, Brandon Ruth, and Jason Schwartzman. Screenplay was done by Michael Bacall and Edgar Wright, and it's based on the Canadian graphic novel Scott Pilgrim by Brian Lee O'Malley, and he did both. He did the writing and he did the art, so it was like full creative might of this guy bringing that comic to life. I did want to ask, has anyone read the comic? I've kind of I've flipped through pictures of it, so I kind of know what it, like the look and
the
feel
style
of
of
it,
it,
but I don't
yeah.
know if anyone's truly invested in the comic or has read volumes of it.
Yeah, so just to be technical, they were graphic novels, which were actually kind of
Sorry, graphic novel.
on the cusp of the graphic novel movement, I think, 04-ish, where instead of, single issues, like you think of Marvel, DC kind of stuff, he really kind of, on the comic scene, the smaller time guys, he really was influential in that way. It kind of rode a wave there too. So again, we'll probably talk about it more later on. I've read them. I don't think I've. So there's six
Volumes, I guess?
books. And the first one I believe was out completely, but they were still being worked on while the movie was being made too. So
Okay.
they weren't
So kind of a Walking
Yeah.
Dead situation.
Yeah, or Game of Thrones and, similar. But O'Malley did have conversations with Edgar Wright and a part in the making of the film here as well. So
Adding on to that question, I just wanted to know where this movie takes place within the comic book series. Like if it does, or if it's more like a story offshoot.
Well, it's mostly spread across. So
Okay.
the whole series across the six, like the action fighting doesn't really start kicking until maybe like the last quarter of the first book. So there's a bit more lead up and kind of setting and stuff like that. That's more your everyday, whatever life kind of comic. And then just suddenly action starts happening like crazy and fights. And then some of the books, like I think the twins fight is like maybe book 5. And so it's all kind of spread up.
Yeah. All right. That's cool.
It's mostly parallel to the full series, the Scott Pilgrim series.
Gotcha.
Cool.
All right. That's good to know.
All right. And for those that are new to this show, on this podcast, we first go over our thoughts on the film before revisiting it for the episode. Then we dive into the story, break it down bit by bit, and talk about the more significant moments. Then towards the end of the show, we give our brief reviews and numbered scores, along with an analysis on the health of the franchise and whether or not this film hurt it. So, AJ, had you seen Scott Pilgrim before this episode?
I had a couple times, maybe. Yeah, so I've seen this quite a few times. I can't remember if I saw it originally in its theatrical release in theaters. I have been to Alamo Drafthouse Quotathon a couple times, which if any audience members don't know, Alamo Drafthouse, more than just Austin now, but started kind of like a local cinema pub kind of thing, and they do more events and like quote along, sing along, kind of fun things in addition to your current box office stuff as well. And so they've had some events for Scott Pilgrim that they do props and all sorts of fun stuff too. So I've been to a couple of those. So yes, I had seen Scott Pilgrim.
Wait, you watched Scott Pilgrim?
Is this a first? AJ watching the assigned movie?
Wow.
Is this happening?
Guys, mark it down. We need to etch this in stone.
Consider it marked.
Although, what would you replace Scott or Pilgrim with? Like, I'm trying to think of an association.
So I was gonna try to work in Mary Queen of Scots, maybe.
I would like to hear that explanation.
We'll save you.
Some royal infighting, I guess.
I'd love to see an action version of that. Irina, had you seen Scott Pilgrim before this episode?
I'm just thinking of Mary Queen of Scots, like hiking up her skirts and doing like a little like across
kick.
the room kick. Yeah.
Mary Queen of Elizabeth Winstead.
Yes. I've seen this a handful of times, I think. And I don't remember the first time I watched it, actually. But I do remember one significant watch of it was my little sister hadn't seen it before, and I had a feeling she would really like it. So we sat down together and we watched Scott Pilgrim, and it was a good experience. So
It was a good experience.
it was. And
Y'all weren't jumping up on the couch?
It was one of those things where you're sitting and watching it, and because you've seen it, you kind of look sideways at the person watching
you're
with
watching
you,
through their eyes.
where
yeah.
There's a joke coming up and you want to see if it like lands with them. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm one of those viewers that I really am conscious of the people I watch movies with, where I'm like, I'm kind of enjoying this through them as well.
Yeah, this is one of those where if you know someone that hasn't seen it, you want to sit and watch it with them just to kind of relive those moments.
Yeah,
again.
I think Edgar Wright movies in general are great for that, because if somebody hasn't seen like Hot Fuzz and you find out about it, you're like, guess what we're doing tonight?
Although Hot Fuzz, I would put a little bit of a caveat on that, because Hot Fuzz and Shaun of the Dead,
They take repeat viewings.
yeah, they take a couple viewings to really let that world sink in and the humor sink in.
Whereas Shaun of the Dead hit its ceiling, and I love it.
Yeah.
Hot Fuzz, every time we watch that one, is just
it gets better.
It's just always funnier. David, how about you? Had you seen this?
Oh, yeah. I don't remember if I saw it in theaters. I think I did. But we own the movie, our family. So I remember watching this multiple times, just grabbing it off the shelf and throwing it in on a Saturday afternoon. This is definitely a feel-good-ish kind of movie for me back in the day. So I've watched it quite a few times.
All right. Noah?
I only just recently watched this one. It is not an oldie for me.
How long ago?
I think half a year ago I watched it. But
Very
yeah,
fresh.
I liked it. Yeah.
All right. For my part, yeah, I saw this I did not see it in theaters, but I think I saw it pretty much immediately once it came out on Blu-ray at some point. Like, I don't know how I saw it or if I saw it on streaming or I just know it was close to its release. I didn't see it in theaters though. But same as you guys, I kind of echo the same sentiment. I enjoyed it at the time, and it's another one of those. Arena, your miniseries has been fraught with movies that I saw a long time ago and hadn't seen in like 10 years.
Right.
And watched again. Like that was Napoleon Dynamite. That was Donnie Darko.
Well, then it was
Sucker
a good
Punch
selection.
in this
It's kind of nice to
Yeah.
revisit those.
But what's funny is the window of time from the last time I had seen them is almost all the same with all of these. So you picked like a specific time in the past that was like, a lot of movies I just hadn't seen in a while, and this is yet another one where I have not watched this in a very long time. So yeah, glad to revisit it. With that said, David, you want to give us that call to action?
Hey, everybody. You ever go on Apple? You ever go on an Apple podcast?
You need to sound a little more like higher voice if you're trying to do Michael Cera.
I know he's trying to do Michael Cera, but he came in with a
you
hey,
should work in the story about Pac-Man.
So you guys know about Pac-Man? It's it's actually back in the original Japanese. It was supposed to be Puck-Man, but actually the thing is, it sounded too. You think because it with the P in the U, it would sound too much. Anyway, Franchise Killer is great, and you should go on Apple Podcasts and follow them. Give that 5-star review. Follow them. Yeah.
Like
I'm Michael Cera.
Are we not them?
I'm Michael Cera. I'm telling everybody, go on Apple Podcasts.
Okay.
Yeah, subscribe, click, ring that bell.
We are Sex Bomb.
Anyway, back to normal though. We are out here for your enjoyment, and if you enjoy listening to us and talk about movies, you should support us in any way you can. We have an Instagram, we have a Twitter, we're constantly posting, we're on YouTube, so follow us on all these different mediums, and the biggest thing you can do to help us is going on Apple Podcasts and giving us a 5-star review, because bing, bang, boom, through the algorithm, we go to the top.
Yep, wow. That was good. Not really, but you got through it. You got through it.
It was adequate.
All right, David, you want to give us that story?
Yes, I do.
Hey, what's up?
If we're gonna date, you may have to defeat my 7 evil exes.
You have 7 evil ex-boyfriends?
Bingo. Consider our fight begun.
And I have to fight,
Defeat.
defeat your 7 evil exes?
Pretty much.
Prepare to die.
What?
What's up? How's life? He seems nice.
I want to take them apart.
We all have baggage.
Yeah, well, my baggage doesn't try and kill me every 5 minutes.
Scott Pilgrim versus the world.
Next time, we don't date the girl with 11 evil ex-boyfriends.
7.
Oh, that's not that bad.
In Toronto, 22-year-old Scott Pilgrim is a bassist for an unsuccessful indie garage band called Sex Bomb. He is dating Knives Chow, a 17-year-old high school student, to the disapproval of his friends in the band, his roommates Wallace Wells and his younger sister Stacy Pilgrim. Scott meets an American Amazon delivery girl named Ramona Flowers after having first seen her in a dream. He loses interest in Knives Chow, but does not break up with her before pursuing Ramona. When Sex Bob-omb plays in a battle of the bands sponsored by record executive Gideon Graves, Scott is attacked by Ramona's ex-boyfriend Matthew Patel. Scott defeats Patel and learns that in order to date Ramona, he must defeat her remaining 6 evil exes. Scott finally breaks up with Knives, who blames Ramona and swears to win him back. Meanwhile, Scott proceeds to get attacked by and defeats the next 3 of Ramona's exes, Hollywood actor and skateboarder Lucas Lee, superpowered vegan Todd Ingram, and lesbian ninja Roxy Richter, while also confronting his own ex, pop star Envy Adams. However, Scott grows frustrated during the process, and after an outburst regarding Ramona's dating history, she breaks up with him. Boom.
So, guys, Scott Pilgrim, we have an exhilarating opening credits where he takes Knives Chow, or Scott Pilgrim takes Knives Chow to his rock out area where Sex Bob-omb is about to play, and we get our really cool first look at how this movie's going to execute that almost live version of a comic book / video game style. And I would say this movie is style forward.
Oh yeah.
And we'll talk about how much substance comes in later on, I guess. But from the outset, and maybe for the first half of this movie, it does feel like style over substance, but dang if that is not a awesome style. Do y'all want to talk about the opening of this movie and how y'all are feeling as it starts?
Well, the very opening is the introduction to Knives, right? So, and you get to see all of Scott's family be like, great, he's dating a high schooler. But the awkwardness in the very beginning of this, if you've never seen it, it's there.
Yeah.
You know, you could feel it. And especially with Scott being played by Michael Cera. I mean, it's just any movie with him is going to be fraught with some sort of awkward moment. But I love the opening scene when he takes her to the actual band practice and they do that pan backwards through the hallway.
Right.
I think that's the first like real sort of comic booky energy. You see like static flying off the instruments. There's a lot of effects being thrown into play. And I believe, if I remember correctly, that intro, like the way they did it and then the music with all the colors and stuff, it was... I'm trying to remember, was it Tarantino? There was another director who watched a screening of it and gave their 2 cents, was like, you need an intro to this. And I think it might, don't quote me, but I think it might have been Tarantino.
I feel like you were telling me that before.
I was.
and you
No,
said
it was it Tarantino?
See, I don't know. I can't remember.
That's what he told me when he learned it.
I think it might be. I remember reading the same thing.
It was one of those things where I was surprised when I found out, but I thought, well, that's a cool little input, you know? So it really paid off, I think, because that was a great opener for the movie.
Yeah. AJ, how do you feel about the opening to this movie, and just does it set the right mood for you? Like, are you on board?
Yeah, so it sets your tone and energy right off the bat, and I think it does. You know, Edgar Wright here. I'm going to start singing high praise, so someone stop me before I get...
No, go as far as you want.
Yeah, just forewarning, I have a very soft spot for this movie, so if I'm a bit biased on one side, just, you know...
Hey, we've all had ours where we've been biased on something, and we got the floor.
I think there's a lot that can be pulled apart in this movie, and at the very first onset of it, I mean, it comes across as, you know, kind of almost saccharine and just a lot of action and flash and style forward, like Reese said, you know, maybe at the expense of substance. But I feel Edgar Wright actually does a subtly genius job of making this fantastical and real at the same time, and blends them so that you don't even realize that. And I've heard people comment. I've never been myself, but this takes place in Toronto, and Toronto is actually a very heavily used locale for filming in a lot of movies. But most people don't know that because they disguise it as something in another city that's not even remotely close to actual Toronto. And this happens in like Atlanta, Georgia, like a lot of places. but Toronto's heavily used in filming. But I've heard that this actually feels like an actual Toronto experience from people, Canadians and people who've been there, lived there
really
and
cool.
stuff. So you get this really kind of almost authentic or authenticity to this while you have this flash and energy on top of it. And it's interesting that with Michael Cera as the lead here as Scott Pilgrim, because, like David kind of alluded to, there's this awkwardness about everything here. Especially he's 22, dating a 17-year-old high schooler is very, just inappropriate, most usually socially inappropriate in Western society. So, and he's reprimanded all around him by his friends and family. And Michael Cera is tough in this role to get over his Michael Cera-ness, because maybe a lot of people that I knew saw him in Superbad first, or maybe Arrested Development. Those are very powerful roles for him and his image, and so getting over that to see him as Scott Pilgrim, who in the comics has a little bit more, I don't know,
cool factor.
Yeah, and like Michael Cera portrays that, but it's not on the surface for you without you picking up and kind of reading, between the lines and subtext and, maybe viewing it more than once and that kind of thing. So,
and yeah, can I say just for like the first half of this, I find him just very unlikable.
Yeah. Well,
like it's just hard to root for him in any way.
I'm glad you brought that up because that's the point. He is not supposed to be a good guy. And this is a very big departure from, your other comic books that we all know, MCU now, even DCU, just your almost commercial, big superheroes, the Jack Kirby style action. Brian Lee O'Malley, wrote kind of more of a Japanese, Tokyo pop kind of, but with Western influence with all the video game stuff and really kind of brought this flavor to it. And Edgar Wright, someone who didn't have any familiarity with video games, maybe Atari, like he didn't know what NES was, Super Nintendo, like Zelda, all this stuff. For him to like put this so heavily and blended well into the movie, like all these kind of pop cultural, like, geek culture, and those things speak to the audience or a certain sector of the audience, and they speak to me because like Zelda in particular was a very formative game for me. And, I've listened to interviews with O'Malley and saying, that's how it ended up in his comics and stuff, because it was just what he knew when he imagined fantasy was, formative video games, fighting games and stuff like that. So Edgar Wright latching onto that aspect that wasn't maybe his original content, that he didn't make that story, but he brought it to the screen in a way that's very just fun. But then you can also peel away the layers and kind of see some of that. But that goes back to the point that Scott Pilgrim is actually somewhat of a complex character, and Michael Cera's casting that is somewhat problematic to that, just because of his, reputation, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like and I was speaking about this before we started the episode. I didn't go into like great criticism or anything, but like I feel like what they need is someone who is nerdy hot, not nerdy.
Having it's interesting because we'll talk about all the other actors who went on to become superheroes in other comic book movies, very successful in this movie right before they hit their big starts. But as far as tone though, like I'm on board just from, the Legend of Zelda riffs and music and the on-screen transitions like Dave. I mean, the transitions alone in this movie are just exemplary.
They're great.
Sorry. Before we jump out of the Michael Cera talk, I just wanted to, even if he is miscast in this role, I think his delivery of some of these lines is truly hilarious.
Yeah, it's really good.
I wouldn't go so far to say as he's miscast. It's harder for an audience member who doesn't know to kind of reach and meet the story halfway, the characterization halfway, because they're overcoming that preconceived bias of Michael Cera. And that's kind of not Michael Cera's fault. And I think he does a good job at what he brought to the screen here.
Yeah, exactly.
It's still fun.
Yeah.
He's still like kind of dorky and nerdy, but he is, a dick and says like really egotistical things and treats other people around him like crap. Like you don't root for him because for a reason. Like he is not a great person. And I think that's intentional. It just, maybe we're not used to that because we see comic book flashy lights, colors and stuff. We want to say, okay, this is black and white, good and bad, or, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's long-winded there.
No,
you're
that's
good.
perfectly
You're
fine.
good. I like hearing you talk.
But yeah, if we're talking like style and transitions, this movie has me like, even if I have issues and nitpicks here and there with this movie, it is one of the most entertaining, like moment to moment movies where, and that's it kind of has like an ADD nature to it. And I think that's intentional because it's like the director is so in tune with the moment that the audience would start to lose interest, and he cuts a second before that happens to the next thing.
And speaking
where
of,
it's like,
just like ADD-ness, like it's jumping, like, but it's seamless because Michael Cera is in conversation, and then you have this smooth transition. They're somewhere else, and he doesn't know what's going on, but you're still with him. And it's interesting because I'll probably talk about this at the end again, but in comic books, if you don't ever read comics, graphic novels, trade paperbacks, anything like that, you've got what's called gutter space in between your panels. And so, it's not a continuous story with words that are filling in all backstory and stuff. And some criticism that's somewhat valid that I hear about this movie is a lack of character development. But this is almost the truest adaptation of the comic book medium there is, because you have this virtual or metaphorical gutter space, which lie in those transitions, where they're jumping between location and setting and sequences. So there are things going on between those things that you don't see that are inferred. Is the same as when you read a comic. So,
it's very episodic too, where you are kind of seeing like short little glimpses into his life and what he's doing without having to basically drag the viewer through every single detail of his day-to-day life.
I always thought that this movie was the best interpretation of a comic book stylistically, as far as just not even just the story or how they portray the story. It's all of the sketches on this. Yeah, well, I mean, like the sketches on the screen, the incorporation of like smoke coming out of nowhere, like things that don't make sense in the real world, the fantastical nature of comics that are just considered normal.
The censoring of Aubrey Plaza's mouth, like
exactly
all these like meta kind of 4D or breaking the fourth wall kind of thing that's just in tune.
What
with
other
the
movie
audience.
has done this? I haven't seen one that has done it as effectively, like,
I mean,
or even
Deadpool,
like,
but in a little bit different way. But.
I still disagree with that.
The thing I love about this movie too is that it's very heavily blocked, which when you think about blocking, you're thinking of theater performances and I was seeing like gag reels for this movie, which there are many, because everything is like to a T. You have to perform everything in a very particular way because the camera is in one location where the frame needs to be, like everything that happens in frame has to be exact. So there are countless takes of all these scenes and all the actors need to show up in the exact place they need to.
Another comparison, I think Speed Racer is another one that does that.
Except for maybe not as successfully.
That's an argument that could start there as well.
Oh no, I'm not saying successfully. It attempts that same.
I've heard the comparison,
thing.
And Speed Racer. I said saccharine for this movie. That is overly. I can't even.
That one is full on cotton candy, and it has its defenders.
Yeah,
it has its defenders.
It's also eligible for another episode.
Yeah, it is. It is.
The reason for bringing up the whole blocking thing is just if someone doesn't get the movie, they have to at least understand that everything is done so deliberately. Like I know there are movies that everything is deliberate, but this is almost the performance has to be exactly as written in order for it to work.
Right.
And that's what they did.
But
you
there's
know?
also-
everything is very clear to read.
A universal aspect of everything, even in the set design, costuming. I mean, this is, I'll use Scott's own words. He's a cocky cock, and he's got this big head and, a huge ego, always wanting knives to puff himself up. But then, they're shopping at Goodwill and stuff like that.
Right.
And they're using, looks like a computer straight out of the 90s. And, but it's also, you've got, kind of a Starbucks hipster scene and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this amalgam of different cultural tones.
Right.
But it kind of lends to that universal groundedness. And then you have the action fun on top of it, which you can just watch this movie and have a blast. Like, you don't have to read into story, character development, whatever. Like, you just have a fun with all the flashing lights and sound and action.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's lighthearted. It's a comic. You can just look at the pretty colors and you can enjoy this movie.
Yeah. I think there's, you had mentioned that there's criticism about character development. Is it specifically Scott or just all characters in general?
I would say probably Scott in particular, maybe Ramona as well.
Yeah.
I think there's arguments that I would make against that, but that's probably for the later portion of the podcast.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk about Ramona Flowers?
Well, before we get to her, because we
Knives
haven't,
real quick?
let's do Knives, and then I guess I don't know how much the supporting cast matters.
The band.
Yeah.
So we did kind of talk about Knives, played by Ellen Wong.
Yeah.
She's the 17-year-old high schooler that Scott Pilgrim's dating, and of course everyone is frowning upon
Right.
ending with her.
The thing is, she's great in this,
Yeah.
and she's constantly fangirling not just Scott, but like his whole band. Like
she is adorable.
She's over the top, but so genuine and pure about it, and that's the character
exactly.
she is.
Love Knives,
which is what makes Scott's sort of douchebaggery even worse.
Oh, yeah,
is that-
exactly.
It's interesting because you have seen that dynamic before, and it's sort of a what does Scott get out of this kind of a thing. And as far as character development for the people around him, I see this movie as strictly all of this is just in Scott's own vision of things. It's not necessarily that we're here to learn about the character development of others. It's more about how does Scott view these people in his lives,
Right.
kind of a thing.
he's very self-centered.
What does it say
in this
about
regard.
himself too? And
Yeah,
this
exactly.
relationship with Knives, and it's elucidated by his sister and Aubrey Plaza's character, that it's a rebound from envy, but he's basically using someone younger and supposedly lesser to him to prop himself up, prop his own ego up. It's like, as a comparison, someone just constantly, he literally says, well, let's go talk again about how great I am. Constantly just, it's a selfish relationship. And
Well, also, like, the fact that his ex-girlfriend's, like, new name is even Envy it's not necessarily that that's what she goes by. I like to think of it as Scott isn't so much heartbroken that she left him, but more about the fact that she got big, and he's envious of her life. He's envious of the fact that he's on the lower end of the totem pole, kind of a thing.
Right.
So there's like this interesting dynamic where he's not really upset about that person leaving him. He's upset about being dumped. He's upset that they are more well off and people have they have a huge following, kind of a thing.
he's so stuck in his own world, and even
Right.
drummer, wow.
Kim.
Thank you. Like, I wish she had more screen time in this. Honestly, that's one benefit. But her character, because they had a past relationship and he, treated her poorly, but she, still kind of maybe sees a glimmer of goodness in him. But even she's like, you're scum of the earth. And he's like, yeah, thanks. Like, in a good way, like always spinning things so that he's not even listening to her or giving her the time of day or anyone around him. It's always spinning things so it's making himself.
Yeah. It's like, how does this
inflated.
help me?
He seems like the guy who has to learn things the hard way, the kind of person who doesn't listen to
yeah.
He always asks for help from people,
And
but never actually wants to listen to it unless it already meets what his expectation was.
Here's where I find the brilliance in this is that you realize Scott is not a good person, but you still like him. Like, some of it's the Michael Cera factor. Some of it, eventually is just the action. Like, he is a good fighter in the comics. Like, he's, well known for his prowess in fighting. So that's where, it kind of goes into the actual battles against the X's and stuff. But
I wouldn't say I like him, but I would say like I'm on board with
you're on
this
board
as
with
the
him
protagonist.
as a protagonist, and you maybe some people might see themselves or certain aspects of themselves in them because he's a real person instead of Superman. I can't identify with Superman. He's perfect almost. Batman, he's dark and whatever iteration you see.
Parents died.
Yeah, but that's supposedly more real than Superman, but that's also on the other end of the extreme. I can't identify with a billionaire who has all the tech in the world and stuff. But Scott Pilgrim, I can identify with because he's ugly and flawed. And a good comparison I like to make too from this movie is BoJack Horseman, the show, which is another
I could see
like
that.
animated. Like when I first watched that show, like they're anthropomorphic, animals. It's a cartoon, and then you realize this. I don't know if you ever watched the show or not. Holy smokes, that show is incredibly deep, especially on the emotional level, depression, all that stuff. Like that will hit you like a truck. And that's because sometimes you identify with this character who you realize is not a good person. There's, serious flaws, things, and you maybe reflect that on yourself. And maybe I'm getting a little too personal here, but that's a real aspect of a movie, and I find value in that. And I found that in the show, and I found that in this movie. And then not to mention, you have that kind of subtle undertones of realism on a deep level, plus all the pop and fun on top of it. So I'll cool off for a minute, let everybody else talk.
Oh no, you're fine.
No, I'm enjoying it. Keep going as many times as you want. But on that note, let's talk about Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who enters the story here as Ramona Flowers. He first sees her in a dream where she's just like on her skates, like going by in the like he's having a dream in the desert or whatever. And there's something like weird about her skates, like they're like magical in some way, even in the real world. Like they melt the snow. I don't know what that means. I didn't look into that.
I think in the comic book it ties into like her being able to go from astral plane, whatever.
Yeah, it's like interdimensional travel, which is like
travel.
She's even tells him when she delivers his package, it's like, oh, you don't have. I guess forgot you don't have those in Canada. It's like an American thing. I guess they have those all the time. So just kind of this like cultural riff, like just kind of silly, whatever, geeky kind of thing.
Right.
And she's like, yeah, yours, my route is like through your dreams or whatever. So it's just a convenient shortcut for her.
Yeah, I was just like, interesting. But yeah, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, how do we feel about Ramona Flowers
I think
and her
she's
performance?
Perfect for this role. And it's kind of like she perfectly embodies that girl that you see from across the room where you're just captivated by who they are just existing in that room, and you want to know more about them.
You can tell they got a dark past.
She's an enigma.
They're aloof enough that
her
they're
eyes.
Cool.
Yeah. It's like her eyes really are captivating.
Yeah.
And I think they work that as much as they can throughout the movie. So I think she's perfect for this role, honestly.
She is. She really portrays, that character, the enigma, the aloofness, but also the allure and, the just the sex appeal, like everything for Scott and that, desire to attain the unattainable, the foreign aspect of everything, but the fun aspect. She foils Scott in that too. She's got flaws herself. And that's kind of the banter between her and Scott is they're both broken people. And so there's the conversation that a lot of people have as well. Should Scott have ended up with Ramona or with Knives at the end of the story? Maybe, it's not the end of the story. Like they're both for each other on this path that they're on currently because they're both changing for the better and learning about themselves. And so she's, has her own flaws that she's working through that she readily admits. And Mary Elizabeth Winstead just, I don't know, she fits that role. She fills that role really well and portrays that role.
Yeah.
The one thing that I think is just another confusing thing is how Michael Cera can get both her and Brie Larson. Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Brie Larson.
And
you can't get
Allison Pill, the
And
drummer,
Allison Pill.
and Knives.
Well, he's
Honestly,
a woman.
he's the
like,
Pete
he's a woman
Davidson.
killer. Like that's literally they all say the real truth of his character. But yeah, just like Scott is just this kind of, I don't know, dweeb, just to say a word, but like also has this this power about him.
Yeah.
Hey, you guys ever seen The Other Guys? It just
Yes.
makes me think of Alan in that movie. How he's just constantly walking around, and women are just fainting. Every time they see him.
It's again that aloof nature, and he sort of pulls that on other girls, where Ramona has him on a hook in a way.
Yeah.
And so it does kind of explain why Ramona went for him later on in the movie, where she's been with these big, douchebag boys who were really hot. And she looks at him as, oh, maybe this is different. Maybe he's a kinder person. Maybe this would be good for me, instead of falling into the same trap over and over again. So that one makes sense.
Right.
I think with Knives, it makes a lot of sense because you're in high school, you see someone who's like 22 and out of school, and oh yeah, they're so cool, they're in a band. It's just a difference of perspective. So that relationship makes sense in my mind too. So it does happen. There are guys who look like nerds and they end up with these really attractive women, and it's another factor other than they're attractive.
Davidson.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's an example. So it's not unrealistic to believe, but I think the way it's portrayed sometimes at surface value makes you think, oh, this is just like a guy who gets all the good girls or whatever for no reason.
Well,
and that's where the character development comes into play. Is I feel like you don't see enough of who Scott is that makes people fall for him.
He's in a band.
Well, you don't see what allures him, and so you don't have traditional character development of, before and after kind of thing. You see a different sort of character development that's reflections of his interactions with other people, and you have parallels in, like you're talking about, his relationship with Knives, and you have that visual where they're in the music shop and she's like, "I'm in love with you," and wafts towards him, and he like kind of blows the smoke away. And then he has that same moment with Ramona later on where he tries to say, he loves her, and she just like brushes it off because it says lesbians.
Yep.
But there's so many parallel aspects in his relationships and interactions with other people. And I think that's an Edgar Wright thing as well, how he structured this movie.
Oh, another example, him explaining his Pac-Man story to Knives versus the way he explains it to Ramona. And that is something you experience in real life, where there are certain people that are impressed by a story you have, but then there are others that just feel like they're impenetrable, or all of a sudden your story comes across as really awkward or just not even cool at all.
Well, and then it also depends on the social, like you said, the social circle.
Yeah.
But that's like his one fact that he knows. And so he impresses, this other group with it, but he can't impress, when push comes to shove, like he doesn't have any substance beyond that story. Or he can't relate it to, maybe everybody.
Exactly.
And there's some foreshadowing too in the character of Scott on the undertones. You have the DDR kind of dance scene, and then where they're doing the fighting, whatever,
the ninja game.
And then it's
Yeah.
Nega Ninja, like the shadow version of it. And if you notice that his character is all in black, and the Nega version is actually in white. So you've got your typical black versus white representing the good or whatever. And then even at the end of the movie, Nega Scott, his greatest enemy is fighting himself. His Nega version of him, his negative, is actually, more of a white tone instead of a shadow or an umber or something like that. And then he even comes back and says, he's actually a really good guy. So that's actually kind of a reflection on Scott. The negative of the negative is actually the true negative. Is that a triple?
Are you saying the negative of a negative is a positive?
No.
The negative of my negative is my friend.
So the Nega Scott is the good guy, and so that means the real Scott has this darkness to him. That might be a better way of phrasing it.
Yeah, so let's talk about how we figure out that, well, back up. Scott starts, quote unquote, dating Ramona pretty quickly. And right after that, he figures out that, he has to challenge or defeat 7 of her not evil ex-boyfriends, just ex-boyfriends.
I think they
7
said
evil exes.
Yeah, they say evil
Evil
exes.
exes, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the first one being Patel.
Matthew Patel.
And it's, and it's almost this, I don't know, Bollywood action musical number
Right.
that's so entertaining.
So awesome.
I saw the
Pirates are in
comic,
this.
and apparently the artwork is very. They
absolutely.
transferred it over really closely.
I mean, the
Yeah.
outfits, like the costuming, is literally off the pages.
Yeah. So, I'm going to lump these two fights together. So we got this one and the next one with Chris Evans, the movie star. No,
Right,
that's
action
not.
star.
Lucas Lee.
Yeah, Lucas Lee. This is where like the movie kicks into high gear. It's one of those perfect confluences of great action and also hilarious. Like it manages to mix them so well. Something that Taika Waititi is not quite able to do with Thor. Sorry.
Well,
Oh my gosh, you just had to work it in there.
So
Yep.
mad.
it's funny on a meta level though too, like Edgar Wright, like just to go back to like his credit. There's so much video game influence in the original graphic novels, video game influence obviously on the style and tone of this movie, and a big presence in video games are Easter eggs, and Easter eggs are littered in this movie everywhere. I mean, in front of every evil X fight, you have X's, or like for the first, you have X's, 1X, and then Lucas Lee, like everything's in pairs, doubles, like everything he does is 2 times. He's got a tattoo of a 2 on his neck, 2 X's, and then the signs of the X's. All these things are peppered
all over the
for
place.
every single round. So many things are peppered in the background that are like Easter eggs for the audience to find too, just like someone going through a video game finding Easter eggs. And I think that's to Edgar Wright's credit.
Oh, yeah. But I just love the creativity on display in both of these two fights where, I don't know, just from just the heightened visual sensibility. And Edgar Wright does this thing where it's almost an anime thing where one character is running towards the other about to punch it, and you almost like you see the lines of the speed, and like the camera shifts, the perspective shifts, and like the runway almost like extends before your eyes just to give them more of a sense of speed. And it's so cool to just see that realized in live action. Like, give me more of that.
And they did that correct. That's what I'm saying earlier, is that I haven't seen anyone else successfully do that in a movie where that looks like it's straight up. They even, like, I think, shorten the top and bottom of the screen to look like a panel.
Yeah.
Like Edgar,
and it's perfect.
It made me think that Edgar Wright would be one of the best people to adapt an anime. Like, just if you're going for that all-out action type of thing,
and,
like an Akira, give him like Akira or something.
I don't know
like,
about that kind of content.
No,
though.
there's some high octane just action in that I think
I
he
know.
can totally nail.
But he always peppers in the comedy. I think the similar issue you have with Taika Waititi overstepping, I think, his boundaries. You might find Edgar Wright trying to do something too serious.
He would do it better.
He
than
would
Taika
lighten
Waititi.
up the
He would do
energy.
it better.
I think
he would do it better.
And I
than
don't know, I can't speak to Taika Waititi, but I think with Edgar Wright, he recognizes where he's weak, and he does his homework and he does his research so that he truly understands, the art and the product that he's doing before he puts it on the screen. And he's just got this natural sense of, those close-ups and the zoom and just focusing on the small little details that build the overall picture.
And also David, I don't think has seen Last Night in Soho, which is very light on the comedy, very light. Is definitely a horror movie.
All right. Oh, I got to check that one out then. I'm just thinking of his other filmography. I feel like it's 75% comedy almost.
I haven't seen it.
Hey, let's do it.
You haven't seen it. We can watch it.
AJ might not have seen it.
We could do a watch party.
A little watch party. I do want to say, though, I love Chris Evans in this movie. His over-the-top way of speaking, kind of like, think Ben Stiller from Dodgeball.
Yeah.
Where
Also, just how
the chin strap
the way he
beard
just jumps on that skateboard.
Yes, that's
like
my favorite moment. He comes out of his trailer and he puts it on. He slides for 5 feet.
Yeah.
And all while his expression is unchanging with those ridiculous
Chad,
eyebrows.
and it's
He's the best. He's the
all
best.
these X's are distilled into, these obvious character flaws, and all these things to a lesser extent reflect on character flaws of Scott. So with Matthew Patel, you have the focus on the fashion and the vanity aspect of it.
Yeah.
And we see Scott later on, worried about his hair or hat or whatever he's wearing, and obviously Lucas Lee is very egotistical, all up in his own business. And, Scott reflects that to that level. And so there is character development is my point. It's just non-traditional. And it's a true adaptation of a graphic novel comic style storytelling instead of cinematic. And that just goes to show with Chris Evans here, this Lucas Lee character, very different from Steve Rogers, Captain America.
Yep.
And Alison Brie herself,
also,
like the music, she sang that song herself. I think she had a musical background as well.
Oh, Brie Larson, you mean?
Thank
Sorry,
you.
no.
Brie
Yeah,
Larson.
she did.
Black Sheep. Yeah, that song was so heavily demanded after this release but it wasn't on the official original soundtrack.
Can I say I miss this Brie Larson?
I agree.
Whatever she became after Captain Marvel is like, it's just something different. Like I don't think I've seen her. I miss the funnier, like looser actual performer Brie Larson versus the like robotic.
And just like it's
action
exemplified
star.
by like the self-awareness. We talk about that on the podcast a lot. Self-awareness of what it is. It's very exemplified in the conversation when Envy calls Scott up on the phone, and you have the side-by-side panels, and then they just say this one-word response like "oh," and she like turns her head to the side dramatically. It's like very manga, very anime. Just those over-the-top emotiveness. It's I don't know.
Yeah.
But she's on it in this movie.
But I love how like Chris Evans, who is the best Chad in film, is somehow not the Chad of this movie.
Are you thinking
He still
Gideon?
is. There's multiple.
Okay, he's a Chad, but
but we're not there
there's
yet.
a- There's
the
a-
thing is, there's something about
aren't?
how.
We're not to the vegan guy yet.
Oh
We're
no,
not to
no, we
Todd.
were talking about
Lucas Lee.
Chris Evans.
Oh, but he was
Lee.
about to reference.
Well, I was just gonna say
Todd.
Todd is like Giga Chad.
Gotcha. Yeah, but the thing is, his character, Chris Evans as Lucas Lee, is weirdly endearing, and it's partly because now I'm familiar with Chris Evans as an actor. And it's just it's so stupid that it's funny.
Yeah, it's
and
that
you
genie-
can't even be upset with him as being a bad guy because he's just an idiot.
Well, he doesn't want to do his own
does that-
dirty work. Like he has a stuntman, which Chris Evans' actual stuntman that he got in his entourage.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
Yeah, and like he doesn't even fight him himself, really. And that, just like Scott doesn't want to actually break up with Knives, so like he doesn't want to do the hard stuff himself. Like he basically depends on Wallace like pushing him and just avoids it. Like he doesn't break up with Knives until like the much, much later. So again, reflection of Scott's character off of other characters.
It's almost like you could say all the evil X's are just reflections of Scott himself that he has to break down
and
in order to reach his final form.
And Scott did have an X patch on his, it was an X-Men patch on his parka earlier. He wears a 0 shirt when 0. Everybody other X's are numbered.
Right.
So, and he's just another evil X waiting to happen at his darkest moment. So, yeah, it's I don't know. I could just ramble on
there's
every
a lot
aspect
to read
of this
into.
movie. So,
Yeah.
Well, he's fighting his own internal evils, and I think.
Sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
I was just going to say that should lead us into the next part.
Yeah.
I do quickly before we push on. We do get the breakup. So he breaks up with Knives. It's kind of sad. I'll just say that.
It is sad, but I think I'm thankful for this moment because up until then you're just kind of like, I don't know about this Scott guy. Like I like all the things that are happening around him, but he's getting really annoying.
Yeah.
And at least in that point, you see some remorse. Like he's sitting in the on the bus, thinking about her face when he
Yeah.
told her, like, hey, you know, this isn't going to work, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And you see him actually upset over it.
Briefly.
Yeah.
And I think that,
But
yeah, briefly. And then he immediately thinks of Ramona. So it's like, and still, he's being very selfish, but there is a moment where you see, oh, he does have feelings. You know, he does think about these things,
Yeah.
but he's just kind of a coward and doesn't want to reflect on them too much. So
Yeah.
When he's on his back
moves
foot,
on.
you know, when Ramona's in charge, the more experienced person, so to speak, you can see his vulnerability.
Yeah.
So
And so that's what helps me
Yeah.
as a viewer to get on board with the story.
Yeah. And one last thing before we move on. We've totally overlooked Kieran Culkin, who I really like as Wallace, his friend. There's always just it's.
I feel like that's how Kieran Culkin is in
The
real
witty
life.
banter
It's
is
almost
just-
like he just
yeah.
came onto set and he's all like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just me.
I actually liked him a lot.
I think he might be my favorite Culkin.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
But like, just the fact that they sleep in the same bed. He's gay, and I presume Scott's not. But the fact that they're just so comfortable with it, and then there more and more dudes keep being added to the bed, and they all just
Yep.
keep like sitting up and just like providing like just awkward commentary, and it's just
Yep.
hilarious. Like it's such a weird dynamic, but it's so funny, and that's just kind of
Yeah.
he's
I
one of the
just- I
forces
love-
that like force him to grow up, but just in his own like
Yeah.
kind of unique way.
We're just embracing whatever Wallace's lifestyle is in the background, like in the house where he and Scott share a bed, like
Yeah.
that's just in the middle of the
Yep.
floor in the
think-
living room, and then they just like wake up with other guys in the bed, and you're just like, what is this
I
life?
think
Across the street from
the
his
part that I think the part that got the biggest laugh out of me, and actually my little sister when she watched it, the first time I saw this, was the scene where his roommate, it's Wallace,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, Wallace.
He answers the door for knives. And she's like, is Scott here? And he's like, oh, well. And then Scott just
Dives
goes
out the
flying
window.
through the
Jumps out
window.
the window.
And he says, oh, he just left.
And he comes back.
Do you know what's perfect?
Yeah.
Do you know what's perfect about that moment though? Like, and it seems like a Scott or a director. Why am I blanking on his name?
Edgar Wright.
Edgar Wright. It seemed
Yeah.
like an Edgar Wright choice to make it to where his fist comes up to cover him closing the window just a little too late.
No, yeah.
Like, and the whole time, like her eyes are. She
Like,
saw the
she's
window. She
watching
kind of saw the
him,
window,
yeah.
and she sees him. She
Walk
does a
behind
side
him.
eye as she walks behind, and it's just so perfect.
It's
Like,
Yeah.
it's the comedy in this movie is gold.
it was
really is.
perfectly executed.
And most of it is done by Wallace, I will say. I mean, some of my favorite comedy moments came from Wallace, like the
well, he's always the one who's like, fight.
Yeah.
hey Scott, Evil X, fight.
Yeah.
Yep.
Also, I
Or
need to
the
move you.
stuff with the phone where he is able to just
Text when he's
so
passed out.
quickly just
I know,
text.
and he's like
passed
passed
out,
out.
Yeah, he's like, he's not even awake.
how
He's
do
like,
you do that?
so good. Anyway, David, you want to continue that story there?
I just want to make sure though.
No,
are
we need to talk about
Yeah,
Todd.
we have to talk about Todd and Envy. Well, we talked about Envy a little bit, but yeah, we are at that point.
Oh, we've
already
passed
read
that?
it. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, so let's talk about Todd then. The next X.
Todd's my favorite. I love that his eyes gleam and he floats above the ground.
And he's like a super vegan.
So-
Yes.
There's like a
I love the
vegan
idea that
police.
Yes, I love the idea that vegan gives you power.
Yeah.
It's just so funny.
Yeah, Brandon Ruth is really good in this role. It's like the first time you see him in this in the club set, not the club, it was at the concert, and it's just cutting from him looking at Ramona, and he's just got this weirdly intense stare as
Yeah.
he's just robotically drumming, and it's just like so perfect. And he's got, of course, the frosted tips, his hair. I
Yeah,
love how when
yeah.
he's just walking, he's always like playing with his hair, like he's pulling on his little,
Yep.
Yeah.
you know, dyed hair. Like,
There's
So good.
something about him that's in my mind like evil Kronk, you know? Like
Oh, a little
they're
bit,
kind
yeah.
of airheaded, but
Yeah.
like
Can't do that
powerful
much
in their own
damage.
way.
I don't even think like the acting was good, but I think this inherently is just the best when it came to the comic book styling
Yeah.
and the music and the humor. I think like this was one of the funniest moments in the movie, as well as one of the
Punch the
coolest to
highlights
look
out
at.
of her hair.
Yes.
That was
What,
yeah, that was
Freddy
messed
had a
up.
girl?
Like
Gelato isn't vegan.
Chicken
Oh, yeah, I love
parmesan
that,
is
uh,
It's not vegan.
Milk and eggs, bitch.
that was so.
but it's
good.
obviously
And just the-
stylistically influenced by like Dragon Ball, which actually was a big influence. I know when Brian Lee O'Malley pitched Scott Pilgrim to Oni Press, the publisher, he basically used Dragon Ball, and I forget exactly which one it is, another thing as like a cross between those
Yep.
things. And yeah, it's again back to the like Todd is almost like Vegeta or someone that's just arrogant, like I don't know.
Yeah.
I also love his undoing, how he tricks him into
I could see it in my mind's eye.
Or whatever.
But I loved we had oh my gosh, what was it? We had Thomas Jane and Clifton Collins Jr. Sorry, I'm looking at the Wikipedia, playing the vegan police officers
So
in these cameos. Just come in here out of nowhere and just like I love the idea that there's
Vegan
this
police.
this vegan police and they can just sense when someone's gone over
So
like
this-
3 or 2 like 2
This is the
strikes.
perfect sort of scenario, I think, of employing things that people generally hate in what is it, the zeitgeist, I guess, where it's like the whole vegan thing was a fad for a while. And then you could think of CrossFit or the kale thing, whereas like if they made this nowadays, I could totally imagine them just like
Gluten-free
they're like so
or-
frustrated with people talking about
Yeah.
how they're cool lifestyle and how much it's helping them. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna flip this on its head and just show you how dumb it actually is. And the humor just really comes through.
There is an element of this movie and the voice of this movie that's and partly why it is such a cult classic is it's saying what everyone's thinking, you know, or like most people are feeling. So that's why there are so many that resonate with it so much and laugh so hard when they watch these scenes is because like, yep, that's how I
But-
feel kind of a
on
thing.
the undercurrent, the lower level there, it's paired with envy, literally here. You know, because this is, you know, kind of appeals to maybe the less than cool crowd or whatever, the geek culture, you know, that maybe have some envy of the popularity or whatever of you know these other people. And you know, again, like you said earlier, Envy as her name. I think Natalie's her actual name. Yeah, just the whole thing with Steven Stills, you know, the band and Crash and the Boys, and just so much of the banter back and forth, and Julie.
The dialogue
yeah,
is so well written.
all the supporting cast is like on point as well. That just beyond just the main, you know, 2 or 3 people here is the support as well makes everything fleshed out and fun.
It does.
Well, I
Totally
also
agree.
think before we move on, the last person we have to talk about is lesbian ninja Roxy Richter.
Yeah.
Also, Katara
Mae
from
Whitman.
Avatar, The Last Airbender. I think she was, in my mind, kind of the weakest of the group because it happened, like her whole fight sequence happened during or kind of pre-breakup, I guess, between Scott and Ramona. So it didn't, that whole sequence didn't really stick in my head as strongly as some of the others.
That was definitely the lesser of all of the action sequences, in my opinion.
I see where you're coming from. I think the novelty of the puppet boxing is still fun, and especially you get to see Ramona whip out the giant maul hammer. And it kind of that's obviously very geek, pop video game, whatever, what have you. Just this huge hammer that's absurdly like. But
I liked that.
The one aspect that I think it was interesting in was that it almost felt like, again, Scott was disregarding another female interaction where it's like, oh yeah, you can't possibly be, an ex or my next
There's a
nemesis.
bit of subversion.
There's like this aspect
of expectations, and that's why Ramona
Yeah.
corrects him every time he says evil ex-boyfriend. She keeps saying no exes.
Right.
Um,
He just doesn't assume that, and when he's encountered with it, he's like, no, yeah, I don't believe
Right.
that kind of a thing. He doesn't take her seriously.
yeah. But again, on a positive note, the fight choreography for all these fights,
Mhm.
awesome. I thought.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so good.
I don't think the movie tops the first two fights until, or at least equals them until the final moment. Like, I think, like, for me, watching those first two fights between Chris Evans and Patel, sorry, I don't remember
Matthew
their
Patel.
actual names.
Lucas
Matthew
Lee.
Patel.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lucas Lee. Those ones were just, like, top tier, like, the best of the best. Just the perfect mix of comedy and action and style. And then I thought, like, the movie kind of dipped a little bit with the fights after that until we get to the twins, which I think the twins kind of, like, amp it up again, but that's on the next
you're
section.
in the minority there.
Yeah, there you
go. It's interesting, too, is that I think that's kind of in the name of variety, because if you notice, one of the other correction that Ramona makes, either like kill your evil ex-boyfriends or, fight them. She says, no, defeat them. So, actual physical fighting, Scott, beats Matthew Patel, but Lucas Lee, he doesn't actually fight or defeat physically. He just tricks him into crashing and bailing.
And, I should say that fight with Todd is up there as well.
Yeah,
Like,
especially, and then you throw in the
enjoyed
base
that.
battle there. I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I mean, just the variety of it, the novelty of all of it. It's kind of constantly shifting, constantly keeping things fun.
Well, that's that ADD aspect where it's like every fight is different. They're not overlapping the same thing every fight. Like I would have gotten bored if they just did the exact same kind of
and
Matthew Patel fighting.
Some people might say a low, but I still think like the puppet boxing was novel enough. The chain whip choreography, fighting, like there's enough there that maybe that character and how he defeats her is kind of cheap, but it's entertaining.
Yeah.
No.
All right, David, we need to finish this story out.
All right. At the next battle of the bands, Sex Bob-omb defeats Ramona's 5th and 6th evil exes, the twins Kyle and Ken Katayanagi, earning Scott an extra life. Despite this, Ramona appears to get back with her 7th evil ex, Gideon. Sex Bob-omb accepts Gideon's record deal, except for Scott, who quits the band in protest. Gideon invites Scott to his venue, the Chaos Theater, where Sex Bob-omb is playing. Resolving to win Ramona back, Scott challenges Gideon to a fight for her affection, earning the Power of Love sword. Knives interrupts the battle, attacking Ramona, and Scott is forced to reveal that he cheated on both of them. Gideon kills Scott and Ramona visits him in limbo to reveal that Gideon has implanted her with a mind control device. Scott uses his 1-up to come back to life and re-enters the Chaos Theater. He makes peace with his friends and challenges Gideon again. This time for himself, gaining the Power of Self-Respect sword. After apologizing to Ramona and Knives for cheating on them and accepting his own faults, Scott joins forces with Knives and they defeat Gideon. Now free from his control, Ramona prepares to leave. Knives accepts that her relationship with Scott is over, and at her encouragement, he leaves with Ramona to try again. The end.
Also the Nega Scott fight too.
Yeah, Nega Scott.
Yeah, so we have our fight with the 5th and 6th boyfriends, the twins. Kind of get some, it's not quite kaiju action, but we get some of that.
I would say it's kaiju. I mean,
like David
through
really
music.
likes this part, I bet.
Yeah. With the Yeti.
Yeah,
my gosh.
I know. He
I was like, I did
Yeti's
really
a
like
dragon.
that.
playing football, but
it didn't have a football. Sorry,
Yeah.
David. So it's not quite a 7,
But,
which was what he gave the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor.
Yeah, they turned it up to
They
11.
were dragons.
Just for listeners that don't know, David watched The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. We covered it on one of our lost episodes. It's not lost. You can find it. But he gave that movie a 7 out of 10.
Knowing and willingly.
7 evil exes.
And he stands by it.
He stood by it multiple times.
Yeah. This fight for me was hit. It was a hit. I liked it. It was good. I was
thought you were
going to
say hit or miss.
I
Yeah.
was about to say
I
that.
was like, yeah, that's how most fights go.
But I still thought it was like it's two people standing on opposite sides playing
Yeah.
music at each other while the CGI does the fight.
Yeah.
And for me, that's cool. From a visual standpoint, it was neat and it was different
sort of
from everything.
short-lived too.
Yeah, it was different from everything else that happened before it. So I still appreciated it and I still
Right.
liked it. But I wouldn't say it was on the level of some of the other fights that
This
we
is
see here.
probably most people's least favorite fight, I would say, from what I've read, because there's somewhat of a cop-out factor. He knocks out two of them in, a short amount of time,
Yeah, it's kind of it feels like it's to speed
Right.
along
So,
the
and
movie
that's
and get to the next part.
true. So the actors here were Japanese, and there was a language barrier. They didn't speak any, so they had some filming difficulty. There was originally more written for this scene and planned for this scene that didn't make it into the final cut because it didn't end up working out. So the language barrier hindered that this scene in this fight a little bit, unfortunately, as well as some of it was cut just for time, overall runtime.
It's at least it does do a pretty good job though at setting up the Gideon thing. He's in the audience there to sign the deal, and we're introduced to Jason
Schwartzman.
Jason Schwartzman. What's annoying is I know these actors' names, but when
how much have I fumbled over
on
them? And the three of them I've had crushed on at some point.
Yeah. But yeah, Jason Schwartzman's character, who I have to say is perfect casting for a record guy who's just
constantly chewing his gum.
He's a Wes Anderson guy. He's
totally called him Schwartzman for a reason.
Yeah, he was in Rushmore was his breakout role, and so this is a little bit, maybe think a little after that, but yeah.
It's a good 10, 12 years after that. Yeah. Rushmore was 90s. So
okay. Yeah, it's funny. One of my trivia facts that I was telling people is Jason Schwartzman and Nicolas Cage are first cousins, and their uncle is Francis Ford Coppola.
Is that your Pac-Man sort of thing?
I knew that his Nicolas Cage's dad was Francis Ford Coppola, but I did not know that Jason Schwartzman was connected to that.
That's insane.
Yeah, that's weird.
Just imagine AJ at a party. Yeah. He's talking to a girl, and he's like, "Hey,
that's his Pac-Man."
Exactly.
With his red plastic cup.
Did you know that
hand?
Nicolas Cage and Jason Schwartzman are related?
And to Francis Ford Coppola.
Oh.
But yeah, I think Jason Schwartzman really kind of is what this movie needed at this point, because I got the sense that at this point this was kind of the low. If I have to pick a lower point of the movie, it's this fight, and actually just this stage of the movie where I'm a little this movie was on giving me the best type of sugar rush, and I'm feeling now I'm coming down from that sugar rush.
Yeah.
But then he just kind of injects this. I don't know.
He has a bravado. He has an energy where he kind of jump starts the energy again, because it almost seems like he's carrying the ending scenes here, but it's less about their fight and more about Scott,
the tension,
realizing his own
it's
problem.
An injection of tension that was been kind of faltering, because we kind of had this struggle with the relationship between Scott and Ramona that's got to be going somewhere, but so it's kind of a redirection of the tension and reestablishing a common goal that we were looking for.
Yeah, we also learn that he's kind of we don't know yet why, but Ramona has this weird attachment to him. The movie's saying, "Oh, this is just the guy I couldn't get over." Of course, we learn that it's more than that later on. There's some actual just weird sci-fi gobbledygook that
she had a mind control chip on her.
But it's so she, after this concert, she takes him away. Scott quits the band, and they sign the deal, and instantly his buddy, what's his name, and the younger guy who's in
Young Neil.
Yeah, Young Neil. Yeah.
You've been upgraded to Neil.
Just Neil.
Yeah. So I guess this is the
part where so Scott's at his lowest, kind of, because now he's outside of his group that he's been with. He's alienated Knives. He was finally getting up the courage to say he's in Lesbians with Ramona, and that obviously fails. So now he's kind of, now where this is the nadir of the emotional arc.
And it's, I don't think this movie commits fully to us showing him going through a whole bunch of pain or strife through this. It tells me, but it doesn't exactly show me. Yeah. And I think that's because it's going for, it's again the kind of slight style over substance here to just keep the keep the audience engaged,
Keep the energy going.
keep the energy going. Yeah, I don't think I ding it too much for it because the movie is just so darn entertaining still, and it's not trying to really put me into that place.
Yeah.
I think it's an intentional choice.
That being said, this is the part that stands out least in my head, even though it's supposed to be this big climactic moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just doesn't hit as hard for me.
Yeah.
Because it has this sort of rushed quality to it.
Yeah.
That for some reason it doesn't feel like it was as well thought out as the first 2/3.
This is where I find that the character development complaint criticism has some merit because, the obverse of the non-traditional, I guess, reflective character development off of his surroundings. We kind of know that Scott is not a great guy, but we don't really fully see him come to that realization until, the very end when the story says he should. And this is the low point that he should be self-examining and that he loses his peer group, rightfully so, like they put up with his garbage,
right.
Easy come, easy go.
And he asks them to not take on a profitable career for the sake that he just does not like the guy that took Ramona. Right. So like that again is him saying like, hey, you should value my needs over your own,
especially when he's been
I act on
halfway
my own.
putting in his practice and dues himself into the band, but that's Stephen Stills, his whole goal and motive and raison d'être and like just everything,
right?
Yeah, so this is where there's opportunity for really hitting home on the character development part on maybe a more traditional way. So I think it is a time issue. It feels rushed and it's like, okay, we got to wrap up this movie. That's valid.
That said, like, I don't begrudge it too much because I think this movie's goal is to just be this fever dream, fast-paced ride. Yeah, it has things to say and there's a lot of, there's subtext and there's all these Easter eggs and everything, but this movie is here to entertain you from start to finish. Like, that's the goal. Like, it's
unfortunate because we have the scene, the final confrontation with Gideon, and he, earns the power of love to fight for Ramona. Pulls the sword of love out, and then kind of that ultimately fails because it wasn't fully formed. There's not a true strong foundation of it. I mean, there might be a good future for it, but that's more of the flash. And then he comes back and, then he gets the more powerful, earn the power of self-respect, but we don't feel like he earned that power of self-respect.
Yeah,
where,
exactly.
What we were just talking about, that would be the reflective period where he gets that self-respect. And then the self-respect meaning what? Like, why does Scott need self-respect in a roundabout way? Because, a lack of self-respect because of these character flaws, and, truly respecting yourself would be respecting the people around you, like Kim and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so all of that is kind of wrapped up a bit too quickly, a bit too neatly without really examining that. And I think honestly, the biggest opportunity would be more screen time for Kim, because that's the farthest backstory, even before Envy. And she's the one that's kind of stuck around him, secretly rooting for him despite her prickly demeanor around him. And then she finally comes around to his side, telling him to kick his teeth in and stuff like that. That'd be so much more fulfilling if we get this power of self-respect, because him apologizing, especially the apology of him cheating on Knives and Ramona, is like, oh, yeah, I cheated on you. Sorry. Everything, we good now?
Yeah.
Like, no.
Well, also, it feels like you have this, it's kind of funny, like this mansplaining moment where he stops Knives and Ramona from fighting with one another. He's like, wait, girls, stop fighting. I'm the problem, kind of a thing. And like that's great and all, but it still feels, kind of like you're patronizing
Yeah.
them, you know? Like not that you actually own the mistake you made, but it's more like, hey, I'm the one that's enlightened and you guys need to stop this kind of a thing. So there's something that could be fixed here that like you said, a little more time with Kim, like at least showing an element of him changing instead of just this 180 that he does
sudden
within
realization.
5 seconds.
I would venture to guess that this is somewhat of a product of the story not being finished in the graphic novel form. And even Brian Lee O'Malley didn't really have a concrete plan of how he was ending it. He had a direction. But, even when asked, like, what's the ending? Like, he didn't know. And that's kind of similar to Game of Thrones there. But I would argue that Edgar Wright did more masterfully of his own original work, complementing the original original content, source material.
It still feels like the style is maintained.
Yeah.
Even if it's rushed.
So despite our misgivings with how he comes to this new realization that he's, I don't know, great.
Self-respect, Reese.
I do really like the final action sequence, and I think it's vibrant, it's entertaining.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good tension there. I like the use of the one-up, bringing him back, and then he pulls out the other sword from his chest. Even though, you're like, I wish he had shown that he earned it more.
I feel like
it's still exhilarating.
And that's where I will fall back on my defense of it from the beginning at the top of the episode where I mentioned gutter space. And we kind of have that a little bit where when Scott is defeated the first time and he goes into the kind of dream world where he talks to Ramona, and she literally says, no, I've got this mind control chip on him. And then she kind of disappears. And Scott says, I feel like I learned something, and we don't really know what. Like, it's kind of vague and a way that sometimes comics are, and that's where that gutter space in between stuff happens that we're meant to infer. So that's my defense of it, just because I like it. That's the goodwill, but there's still opportunity.
Because I like it.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts on the action sequence here that closes out the film before we get into the actual conclusion? Nope. All right. So in the end, we see that Ramona feels, maybe this isn't meant to be. She begins to walk off into the metaphorical sunset here, and he kind of, I guess, is like, maybe this thing with knives could work, but then there's also this last minute, no, we need to give this another chance.
Well,
like Knives, I know that, but Knives is like, you should, if you, I don't forget exactly.
You've been
what
fighting
she
for
said.
her this whole time.
By the way,
besides, I'm too good for you.
Speaking of Knives, I do love when she joins Scott to fight Gideon. I forgot to mention that part. And the fact that they bring back, like, this was something AJ mentioned earlier, like the reflection of things that happened previously in the story, where they would do Dance Dance Revolution together in synchronization, but now they're, like, fully synchronized as, like, good friends and defeating, the true evil in this situation. I do really enjoy that incorporation. So that was actually a memorable, like a little highlight.
And him treating her as a peer instead of a prop to prop himself
exactly.
up. That's how he is able to defeat Nega Scott.
So I really enjoyed that incorporation in this little final fight.
So there's your, you mentioned those other Edgar Wright movies you have to watch more than once. Well, maybe there's a case for watching this more than once.
Exactly.
You're right. And talking this out, like I have a score that I wrote down for this movie. It's maybe one of the ones that I
might adjust.
Maybe give it a little bump as
maybe. I was thinking about that
we'll
as well.
See. This discussion has
this one as well.
And I don't do that often.
I think it's a product of listening to anybody who's very not fanatical, but avid, like just very passionate about something in a positive way. Like you want to synchronize with them, you want to sympathize and kind of get on that energy train. So
But it's also like there's certain movies that aesthetically, just from the outset, you're like, maybe this isn't as much for me. I can still like it. But
Yeah.
I think I'm just kind of challenging your initial assessment of Flash over substance. And it's like, well, there is substance here. It's maybe just not traditional in its delivery.
I'm just saying sometimes it takes that person who has the in to that movie to kind of unlock that same feeling for you, where it's like, oh, you know what? One thing we didn't talk about was Evil, as I'm watching it right now. Evil, Michael Cera, who ends up just
Scott.
Nega Scott. Yeah, who I love that scene where they just walk out and they're just like, hey, that's cool. Like that was the conclusion of that.
Oh yeah, he's actually a nice guy. Yeah. We sort of brushed over that before too.
Yeah. Scott Pilgrim and Ramona Flowers give it a second chance. Then we cut to credits. Any final thoughts on this movie,
there is a
guys?
debate.
Yes.
You know, some people argue that he should have ended up with Knives, or he should have ended up with Ramona. There was actually
I have a very
alternate
specific
ending
answer. Go
where
ahead.
he was originally going to be ending up with Knives, and the cast and crew did not like that.
And she's 17 years old.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I know, relatively speaking, like I guess that's a 5-year
But,
difference.
yeah,
But
and
still, that's a
so,
lot when you're young.
You know, to answer some of that is, like Wallace said very early on, like, run away, like, you're too good for him. And she comes to that realization herself, kind of tongue-in-cheek, like, to get him, prod him, but also, like, she is too good for him. And actually, in my opinion, Ramona and he are good for growth in them, in themselves together in a relationship, because they're both looking to grow personally, and they're both kind of what they need right now, which Ramona said early on. It's like, maybe you're just what I need right now. And maybe they have a long-term future, maybe not, but I think there is opportunity for them to help each other go in the same direction, to overcome those character flaws.
Yeah.
I think when I watched the end of this, I was actually hoping they wouldn't, and that she would leave. And not that he would end up with Knives, but sort of like this was a learning moment. And maybe one day they would end up together again, but it was sort of no, you don't need her. What you need is personal growth, not necessarily someone that will prop you up. And in a way, he sort of, throughout the movie, in my mind, used Ramona as his own sort of badge of honor, which I think a lot of people do, is when they have this attraction to someone, it's more like, what will that reflect about me if I'm connected to this person? Yeah. So for me, let's just say I directed this movie. I would have had it like Ramona leaves, but there's an understanding between them. Like he learns to be friends with girls, not necessarily see them as something that is supposed to prop him up, and, just connect better in my mind.
I agree too. And even from another perspective of this movie shows, like with Knives and him, a strong imbalance in the relationship.
Right.
In which she's seeking him the whole time, but he's not really.
No, yeah, he doesn't give her.
And then there's that
much.
same thing with him and her,
right?
With him and Ramona. So I would like you said, for it to be on a more even plane, where like they decide not to get in a relationship, and then maybe later,
exactly.
Once they've both matured.
Like she could walk away saying like, I'll see you next time, kind of a thing. And like there's like an opportunity.
The way I came at it was, I'd say a lot of people are geared to, see the protagonist and Ramona is the prize to be won, which is obviously not a good perspective. And, so intrinsically we're like, oh yeah, he's got to get the girl in the end. And this, what you're saying is kind of counter to that. And I still feel that Ramona herself, being party to that relationship, gets benefit from being with Scott herself in a relationship, because they're both growing up in their own way. And I feel like there is balance and counterbalance, just it's a little bit more tenuous because of their baggage. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because they're learning that, relationships are real and they can be ugly, but they can also be fulfilling despite that.
Yeah.
So that's my perspective on it. There's not a right answer, but I think that that the fact that this movie and this ending in particular gives you this discussion ability instead of, yeah, he got the girl, no, there's actual some real thought about, this, and making Ramona a real character instead of just a prize on a pedestal,
right,
is important.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
Agreed.
One other thing I wanted to bring up that we didn't really touch on that I think is a big part of this movie is the music. The fact that there's got to be 20 songs, throughout this whole thing. We got there's always a music number in this, and I think that infuses a lot of energy, which I love because they did a lot of original music, as well as incorporating things like Beck and Metric is another band they use, but a lot of it is Beck helped write some of the original stuff that I believe Sex Bomb plays, which is sort of like an indie punk
garage rock
sound, which is super cool. Yeah, garage rock would be a better way to put it. But anyway, a little shout out to the music because it's everywhere and it's really, really good.
Yeah, and this is a precursor to kind of what we get in Baby Driver, where there's just the music is so infused with what's happening in the movie. I feel like a lot of the times, like Baby Driver is like the final form of what this movie is doing, where it is literally like important to this.
And
the action.
And Scott Pilgrim on a little bit more of a level too, with the sound effects more than score too, with like the the Zelda opening the chest scene or obtaining the prize, little da 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 like kind of stuff. Like that stuff adds flavor as well, and it's very unique to this movie, and I love it.
Yeah,
I do too.
All right. This concludes the story portion of this podcast. We're going to take a quick break, and on the other end, we're going to get into our brief reviews with numbered scores, get into what critics thought, talk some box office, and close out with some franchise talk. So we'll see y'all then. Welcome back. Let's talk Scott Pilgrim versus the World. I didn't say the full title last time. I just kind of said Scott Pilgrim.
Well, I think people
gets the
refer to it as
idea
both.
across.
Yeah, but David, you got our scores there. You want to pull them at random, please?
I do want to pull them at random. All right.
I don't know what we did just there, but that was something.
First up, we had a whole little weird bit that we didn't plan for.
Yeah.
Probably 8-bit. So this first score is Reese with an 8.5.
I will determine if I want to adjust this after I review the movie.
Okay.
Like it's
yeah, you kind of have to talk yourself through it.
Yeah. And we'll see if I even talk myself through this successfully. So I do think this movie is style over substance. That said, I also think it has a lot to say, and I find it just immensely enjoyable from scene to scene to scene. There is no part of this movie where I'm ever like checking my watch or, I don't know, just waiting for it to end. The whole thing is just, it is straight up comic book video game goodness injected straight into my veins. And it's kinetic, action-packed, hilarious, and from an aesthetic standpoint and just an enjoyability point, I can't criticize it at all. My only issue is I find it really hard to get behind Michael Cera's Scott Pilgrim character. I don't find him likable in the first half of the movie. I know that's the intention, but I don't think the movie does enough work to bring us up to, believing that he's made this change, or he's had some huge revelation that, oh, wow, I can be good, or wow, I have self-respect. Like, my problem with this movie is he is disrespecting all the people around him. I never got the impression that he had this low sense of like self-esteem or whatever. Like, yeah, he's a dork and he's a nerd and he doesn't. I imagine he doesn't have the highest opinion of himself, but that never seemed like his central concern, is that he like, man, I need to find self-respect. You know, like it's I wish that was seeded earlier on in this movie as the goal. Like, oh, I need to, like, I keep talking crap about myself. Like, wow, I suck. Like, I needed more of him, like, thinking he's not great. And yeah, there's times when he's like, oh yeah, our band sucks. And he says that. But I never get the sense that he thinks he's the worst ever. He seems kind of oblivious to the energy that he puts out, because people are constantly telling him oh, you're scum of the earth. But he's like, yeah, thank you. Like, like that's his, I don't get the impression that he internalizes any of that and then tries to work on that. I more wanted to see more of him, like, realizing how crappy he's been to the people around him. And you get that one scene at the end where he apologizes to Alison Pill's character, the drummer. I forget what her name is.
Kim.
Yeah,
Pine.
Kim. And yeah, he kind of like, yeah, but it just seems like a little too, like too little too late for me. But apart from that, I don't get the impression that that is this movie's goal. It is more to be just this fever dream of awesomeness, and it does achieve that, and it does, and a lot of the subtext in this movie does work. I just have certain flaws with the character of Scott Pilgrim and how that character arc is executed. Everything else to me is like 10 out of 10. So I guess I'm at the point where I have to decide if I lift my score or not. So I'm gonna lift it to a 9, begrudgingly, because I think it really does succeed in so many ways, and what really overcomes everything for me is just this movie's, the dialogue, the writing, just everything is just so pitch perfect and just hilarious, and just it's a movie that I have, if someone brings it up and they haven't seen it, I'm gonna be like, oh, you gotta see that, because it's one of those gotta see movies, whether you like it or not. I'd put it up there. So yeah, I'll give it a 9 out of 10.
All right. Next up is David, me, with an 8. I'm just going to go ahead and bump that up to an 8.5. This is one that I feel like if you came to me back in high school when I was, watching it, I would have given this like a 9 or a 10. I love this movie. And I think there was something recently just about how it's not the same as it once was for me. I can't really see it through the lens that I used to see it through. I don't know why, but even leading up to this, it's like, it doesn't have the same kind of rewatchability factor. And then we start watching it as we're talking about it. I'm like, nah, you're wrong. You're wrong, David. This is definitely rewatchable. What is wrong with you? It just, and I used to rewatch all the time. I don't know. I think that this movie is all about the music and good vibes. There is a deeper story that you could probably look into, but I don't think this movie needs too much. Because it is adapting a graphic novel. It is not trying to, I guess, be the next drama Oscar winner. I think that everybody who acts in this is phenomenal. The music is phenomenal. They're doing stuff I haven't seen in film yet, and I think that you could give this an even higher score, but there is just something about Michael Cera that just doesn't work for me, and that is where I'm deducting the most points. I don't like his face.
What if he's like, what if Michael Cera is like our secret celebrity fan?
I'm sorry.
And he's the only one we have, and we're just roasting
So I want
his
you
face.
to, I want to hear what it
Not
is
likely.
about Michael Cera that you don't agree with in this movie.
That's probably his shaggy hair, honestly. No, I don't like him in his monotone way of just shambling through life. I don't really care for his way of doing that. I think that maybe if somebody else did it, it would be better.
I just kind of want to punch him.
Yeah.
Let's not be
Look,
that
no,
harsh.
I don't want to punch Michael Cera. He's great.
There's something.
There are a lot of people
there's
that
something
wanted to
about
punch
him
him in this
that,
movie.
like, he's not a bad guy. He seems like he's
his
a
character,
nice guy.
I for sure want to punch.
But there's
him in
just
the
like
face, yeah.
you just see certain people, and you're like, man, there's just something about you.
Yeah, and I've seen him
it's
some other.
I think
Canadian.
it's probably that you see that indecisive nature that and that
You're
particularly
analyzing my
No,
personality
no,
right
I,
now.
And I know you, and I
Yep.
think this will help you with why you don't like this character is because he is wishy-washy.
I hate
He's not,
wishy-washy.
He's
You're just
not
jealous.
determined in anything. He has no determination other than to get Ramona.
Yeah.
And so everything else,
Bad
you
motivations.
don't respect him because he has no motivation.
Irina gets me.
Yeah.
I never thought about it. But
He
I
doesn't
think
have a
you're right.
job.
That
I mean,
could be
yeah,
it,
you're
actually.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Like
Well-
he's just not grown up. He lives across the street from his parents' house, and
I think what I didn't even go into much thought about it, but I think you nailed my perspective, which
Yeah.
is like I don't like people who don't have agency, and he has the least agency of like a leading role person in an action film that I've seen, but it still works. But yeah, he is the.
Yeah, I would say
the
that
crux
that's
of my
that's
score.
kind of like the point of it.
Yeah.
Actually,
I think they could do better. I think they
Maybe.
could do a lot better. I think that
No,
he just
okay.
works.
I actually, as much as you say that, I wouldn't change the casting in hindsight. Like before the movie got made, I might switch it up. But I think what I really like his strange energy.
Look, he's not
Like,
bad in this. I want to clarify.
Here's what I'll say is that he has some good lines, and those lines are like at least funny personality moments that work specifically with Michael Cera.
that's true.
But there's also other types that I might like more in a role like this.
I wouldn't change it though,
Yeah.
because it's a risk that I wouldn't be willing to take because it's such a good movie.
So I think what we were isolating there is more the way the character is portrayed to you.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I really like those scenes where he's dejected and he leans on the fridge and falls down. He's like, it's too hard.
Thought experiment here though.
Stuff like
the
that.
campy action, like beat him up and how he like wins every fight though. Would you be behind him if he didn't have this almost underdog aspect about him? Like if
That's a good
put
question.
Chris Evans in the protagonist spot here, and
Yeah, it
now
wouldn't feel the
he
same.
seems like a bully because he's
That's why I'm
fighting all these
saying-
guys.
Well,
That's why I'm saying I think we needed like a hot nerd. Like
yeah,
maybe
you
like
can
an-
do both. Like remember Needy from
Yeah.
Jennifer's Body?
No, I'm thinking like an Andrew Garfield. You get someone like I don't know.
No, it's possible to find somebody who also has that sort of who you can dumb him down into a loser sort
Although
of
I
role.
think you run the risk of there being a worse casting choice.
No, I agree. That's why I
at
wouldn't
the
change
time
it.
that this movie came out. Yeah. So
I wouldn't change it because I'd be afraid of what would go wrong, but I think that there is opportunity. So.
I think I agree with you as far as if I were to change any of the characters in this movie with a different actor, I would probably more likely change him out. Yeah,
Mhm.
I would agree with that.
I think we've deliberated on this long
Yeah,
enough.
I
Dominic
think so
Monaghan.
Yeah, honestly, maybe.
Not enough sex robots.
No, I could see
Gosh.
Dominic Monaghan though.
That really scarred you, didn't
Yeah,
it?
I mean, can you ever think of Dominic Monaghan again, like without thinking
No.
of that role in Mute? No. But moving
I
forward,
can. It's almost not. It's not canon to me. That's not real life.
It's not
Not
canon.
Penny's
doesn't
boat.
exist. All right, well, no, let's just jump to you then, because you come in an 8.
Yeah, I'm gonna bump that also
All right.
up to an 8.5.
All right,
Da-da-da. Yeah, one up.
Reese, insert music from
0.5
Zelda.
up.
I will not.
Well, here's what I think this movie is. I think this movie is really, really charming stylistically.
Yeah.
And I think it's very unique conceptually, and it comes right off the pages of a comic book.
Mhm.
And that's good enough for me. That's all I got.
Very well said.
We've
Yeah.
kind of talked out everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and let's go for Irina next with a 9.5.
Yeah, I think this movie is nearly perfect, and mostly when I'm grading movies, I'm trying to, think of the director's vision in all of this, and the fact that he tries specifically to make every scene exactly as envisioned. So I have to believe that this is pretty close, or if not as close as he could get to his vision with this movie. And it works.
That is true.
There's-
It seems like uncompromised.
Yeah.
In a way.
So I also am impressed by we brought up the fact that there's a sort of ADD nature about this movie, but it's still digestible. I feel like there are movies that come across as ADD and you can't really follow them, but he manages to sort of toe the line where you're jumping from scene to scene, but you don't feel lost. Everything is very easy to read.
Especially for people who are ADD. It's great for you.
So you can enjoy this on a superficial level and just find it fun and lean into the weird a little bit. And it's just an enjoyable watch. If you watch it more than once, you do notice little details in the background of every scene that are reflective of the story and what's going on. And you feel kind of taken care of as a viewer, where you can sit and just know that you're going to have a good experience with this movie. The part that I do deduct points is the whole final sequence, where I'm totally on board with this character being flawed. I have no problem with that. And the only issue is that I think it's more for selective viewers to get on board with him. Because you said before, Reese, that you don't really feel like he went through much in the way of understanding kind of what his problem was.
Yeah.
And I do agree with that. But for someone that can relate to this character, they don't need that.
Yeah.
They can see it. And it's more that he's not in tune with himself. And that's been the whole problem with the movie, or with him in the movie, is what I should say, is that he's not in tune with who he is.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads into the fact that he has no initiative. And the only thing he knows is that reward system he gets from the people he dates. Like, this person likes me and they talk about what's good about me. And that's the only identity I have, basically, is what he's going through. And he has no identity outside of that. There really isn't anything he feels passionate about until Ramona comes along. And then he actually finds something he wants to fight for. But along the way, he starts realizing, or it should showcase that he realizes he has a deeper problem and starts facing those issues. So my issue where I take points is the end, because he just all of a sudden pulls out the sword of self-respect after thinking that the true weapon is love, when really he wasn't going after love in the first place. He was just trying to find self-respect. This is my issue because it happens so suddenly, and the fact that it ends with him getting the girl really almost counters the fact that he earned self-respect, in my mind, as a story. It's like, oh no, love was the thing. It comes across kind of as like countering what that message was.
Yeah.
And I would more fully believe that it was him earning self-respect if he had parted ways with Ramona, because he realized trying to attain her was just him trying to feel good about himself. Yeah. So that's where my issue is. It's like, it's nearly perfect. It's nearly there in my mind as a perfect movie, but there's just that one part, and maybe more time with Kim, maybe just a moment where he has more self-reflection and does a good selfless deed towards someone else other than Ramona.
Yeah.
So
Knives, perhaps.
Well, he does have that moment with Knives where at the end where he's...
Again, it's like, it's just that rushed sequence. I think if this movie had more time to work with its ending, there could have been a perfect film here. There was probably just time constraints, I don't know exactly what issues, but that is where everything kind of goes wrong for me.
Yeah.
So my 9.5.
But you still gave it a 9.5. That is high score.
No, I think this movie is excellent. There's not much I would change about it at all. That's just the only part. So we'll leave it at that.
Well, last but not least, we have AJ with a slow zoom in of Justin Timberlake's deadpan.
Yeah.
That's what I was given.
Yeah, that's basically, what I gave this movie.
Yes, I know.
10?
Yeah.
Is it a 10?
It's a 10. So, this movie has my number. It's like it speaks my language on the geekdom and like the music and the references to like the culture of gaming and everything, and like on a storytelling. I mean, I will fully admit like my hypocrisy on grading this movie, because I completely agree with everything that all of you guys have said, and I've thought of them myself. Like, these are flaws with the story, and the character development of Scott. And normally I would hammer on all that stuff and on a movie, and like, this isn't a perfect movie. And I know Noah's made this point too. 10 doesn't necessarily mean a perfect movie. It's just the other aspects of this movie have my number to such an extent that it like overbalances, outweighs the negative. This movie, the making of the film, the technical aspects of it, the transitions and the style is so well done. And the style is so, there's awesome style and, popcorn movies and stuff like, but I think this is true art, more than just, glitzy fun, because this movie has a simultaneous frenetic energy, yet it's focused. It's simultaneously fantastic and real. There's aspects of it that just speak to me to my core, and just maybe because, like Brian Lee O'Malley in his inspiration for this, some of it was just whimsy, and he kind of had an idea of wanting to do this stuff, and a lot of it was just novelty and figuring it out as he went, just from listening to interviews. But it drew upon his, formative experiences with video games and, a lot of his other things, and writing and Calvin and Hobbes and childhood stuff, and finding your way as an adult and kind of realizing that, you've got flaws and stuff like this. It's definitely not ultra deep, but I kind of find this a story of not just Scott, but also of Ramona, because I feel like she undergoes a bit more character development. I kind of almost the same argument of the second person protagonist, or third person perspective protagonist with, Furiosa and Fury Road, that kind of thing, where Ramona, this is kind of her story almost. But it's also Scott Pilgrim versus the world, not Scott Pilgrim versus the 7 deadly exes or 7 evil exes. It's versus the world, and like him coming to terms and growing up and having an experience of becoming a better person. And that's where this ending of this movie and going through that kind of mystery door into this other future is not like winning the prize or winning the trophy. It's saying, no, there's more work to be done. And that's a real thing, and these people can do it together. And on top of all that, you just have all the fun and awesome action and music on top of it, as well as an amazing supporting cast, and so many people who have become, superheroes in their own right in media, and kind of here they captured them right before they made it real big. I find that awesome. Character development, I think, really could have been fixed with a little bit more time with his darker past, and I think there is a timing issue. But I feel like if you cut out any other time, I mean, all that amazing quippiness and quotable aspects of the movie and the fun of the first part of the movie, like, I don't want to lose any of that to have, more moments of darkness and introspection later on. And that's where, I think this is a true, like the most true, genuine, like adaptation of one media to another, that being graphic or comics to film. And I see the artistry in that. And that's just so impressive to me. That's why I give this a 10, despite the story miscues and the character growth opportunities. All the surrounding aspects of this as a art form really speak to me, and this movie is in my top 5 for that reason.
Dang, the top 5, huh?
Yeah,
Nice.
it is.
All right. We'll have to go down that list of top 5s then. I mean, I'm aware of one of them, but
reminding me
Or
of how
two
like
now.
the way we score things, like there's really no exact
Yeah.
list of requirements for what you need to
It's like-
to score something.
I feel like
this
that's
is
a 10.
yeah, sometimes it's
Yeah.
just like a gut feeling you have, and
Sometimes
it's
it
all-
speaks
it's
to you,
all
sometimes
personal.
it doesn't. And yeah, it
Yeah,
draws
exactly.
on your
And then-
background experience. If you didn't grow up playing video games, then you might just be meh about this.
yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you feel the 10, and then other times you're like, that's a technical
So this
10.
is-
I don't necessarily
Yeah.
want it to be a 10, but dang it,
This
it
is exactly why I like when we average out our scores,
Yeah.
because it more clearly exemplifies like what the standard scoring of the public would be, because some people are just really high on something and some are not. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well said, AJ.
And I think it's, speaks to the credit of this movie, and I think Edgar Wright in particular, that, we have, half of our group here raising their scores because there is substance to this movie beyond the glamour and the fun, the frenzy.
And sometimes
of it.
you need to talk it out with other people to figure
Yeah.
out what you saw. Yeah. So that's why I like talking about all these movies with everybody.
Let us know what you guys would score this movie, and let us know on Instagram.
Yeah. With that said, David, AJ,
Well, yeah.
you want to crunch those numbers for us?
So speaking of averaging out, so we've got a group average for Scott Pilgrim versus the World of a 9.1 that ties
there
it
it is.
with.
Fistful of dollars.
Yes.
For,
So we have The Prince of Egypt, Django Unchained, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Enter the Dragon, all at 9.1.
That
Wow.
is good company right there.
What a weird mix of movies.
Yeah.
I know.
We have War for the Planet of the Apes at a 9.2. And then below it, we have a few 9.0s for Leon the Professional, It, and Napoleon Dynamite. And similar to Napoleon Dynamite, I mean, that got a really high score, a 9, 1 point above this. I feel like Napoleon Dynamite kind of captured the quotable aspect of it. That's what propelled it so much, the quirkiness. I mean, this movie is equally quotable, and then you have all the stuff on top of it in my book, too. So
yeah.
That
They
makes
also
sense.
both feature shaggy-haired, awkward boys in the lead role.
Let's get John Heder in instead.
That'd be weird.
That
I
would
don't.
be
I
fun.
don't think you would work
It wouldn't
either.
work.
No.
Maybe, hey, what about Tom Holland?
No.
Yeah,
we're
he's
just
such a
pulling all the
nerd.
I'm so
Spider-Man
tired.
actors. Tobey
Yeah, just
Maguire.
all the Spider-Man actors.
Hold on.
I'm so
Um,
tired of Tom
Superman,
Holland
what's
being
his
cast
name?
for things.
Let's get Chris Pratt.
No,
Chris
no,
Pratt,
no.
yes.
What's his name? Who plays Superman?
Henry Cavill.
Yeah, let's get Henry Cavill to
Henry
play.
Yeah,
Cavill.
he's totally
Lead.
awkward and
Yeah.
definitely suits the nerdy role for
Yeah.
sure.
He is a
mean,
nerd.
Yeah, hey.
Yeah.
Actually,
all
he
right.
might fit the comic book. Well, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, let's go.
he would actually make, I think, a really good Chad. Like
The vegan
like it.
Chad.
the vegan, either the vegan guy or
Lucas Lee.
I mean, you can't get more perfect than Chris Evans,
All
I
right.
think, for Lucas Lee. But yeah,
All right, moving on to critics. On Rotten Tomatoes, this movie has an 82% with an audience score of 84%. So pretty much in line there.
Critics. What are you
Metacritic.
doing?
Metacritic, we got a 69 from critics. Nice.
Nice.
And an 8.0 from audiences. And on IMDb, we have a 7.5. So positive, but not ecstatically positive,
Yeah.
I would say, across the board, pretty much. And 69 on Metacritic doesn't sound good, but that's actually still considered generally favorable. You're in the green on Metacritic so long as you are 61 and above. So just for a little context there on Metacritic. So good reviews across the board here
Right.
for this one. So at the time, considering this is a cult favorite, you'd think it would have gotten not great reviews.
Mhm.
Actually did get reviews, good reviews when it was released. So that's encouraging, I feel like. Box office. This movie released on August 13th in 2010, and also playing at the time were The Expendables, Eat, Pray, Love, The Other Guys, which we did reference in this episode, I believe. Didn't we?
I
Yep.
did, yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. And Inception. So a lot of,
What a good year.
some big
Oh
movies
wow, that's the year.
I did see
Reese-
this in theaters. I remember.
there. Oh, that put it in context for
Yeah.
you just listing those other movies.
So I didn't watch this in theaters, but you mentioned Expendables, and I'm pretty sure that was the year that I went out with your then girlfriend, now wife, Amber Reese.
So your
and
ex-girlfriend?
we saw Expendables.
Yeah, y'all saw it and y'all liked it.
Yeah.
Well, to add to the context even more, Irina and I saw Inception together back
There you-
then as well.
This weird year, huh?
Dating
Yeah,
Inception.
interesting. History making.
And
That was also the same time we saw Inception twice
We did see
together.
it
We
twice.
saw it in IMAX. And that was the time we watched it at IMAX. And at the beginning, I think it was like, what was it? The Austin, what's it called? I forget.
depends what you're talking about.
Black Bullet Museum.
Yeah, I think that was it.
Yeah, we saw it at the ball.
And before the movie, they played this whole like, the stars at night are big and
Oh,
bright.
you're gonna like make
Deep
me
in the
look bad
heart
now?
of Texas.
Oh, come
I
on.
don't know. I remember sitting in the theater and you're like, ugh, Texas is so annoying.
Okay. All right.
Hey, fair enough though. Fair enough.
I'm just gonna say I
I
just
was like,
moved here.
Over here, I'm clapping
grew
along.
up here.
Yes, I know. No, and also I didn't say it like that. I would never say it like that.
Ugh, Texas
And-
is so annoying.
It is. It is funny
You
though.
were like a
how-
Lucas Lee.
No, I'm just like, people in Texas are so pretentious. They have their own little anthem they sing. They
like,
also have
I
their own
was-
flag that can
Oh,
wave.
what-
David,
what's so
I
great
was
about-
born here.
What does Ohio have?
Absolutely nothing. It's worse. Corn. They have corn.
Cool.
Oh, trust me, it's not better.
Yeah, it's pretty eerie up there.
They got 4 seasons though.
Yeah, that's true.
The
That's true.
hotel?
I'll give them that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably cooler.
All right, the movie was budgeted. There's multiple reported budgets on here, so I'm going to list the range. It was between 60 and 85 million for the budget on this movie. So pretty hefty, but not like enormous, I'll say. So
Yeah.
big budget, but not huge.
This is going to be hard.
I'm already
That
recusing
said-
myself because I know it.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to start with, since it's your miniseries, Arena, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, gosh. What was the number
gosh.
again?
65 to 85 million,
Oof.
released in the summer. Late
the-
summer, August
Against
13th.
Inception.
See,
and
the
Expendables.
difficult thing is this had, like, that comic series already had, or the graphic novel already had, like, a cult following, so...
Very,
but I don't know how big
it
that
was.
was.
It was. So he didn't make Comic-Con. He didn't turn in time to make Comic-Con, but they did go to SPX, and there was kind of a pretty big rumbling of Scott Pilgrim. It was kind of this cusp of like, I would say, but it's one of those communities that's it's kind of smaller. So there's
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Big news in a small community.
It had huge social media interest.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
it's hard to
yeah.
gauge, really.
Forums though, like because this is, I mean, Facebook was there, but not huge or not what it is now. It's not meta.
Let's go with... I'm just going to go with 100.
100.
Yeah.
All right. David.
200, Bob.
200, Bob. Noah.
77.
Noah
All right.
is not the winner. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no,
Wow.
Like,
Man.
no, I'm just kidding.
You're going to do that one time, though.
No, you got it.
How close am I?
Pretty close. It got 49 million.
Oh,
worldwide.
no.
Yeah.
That's not good.
I mean, you picked cult favorites, Ernie. You should have
Yeah.
known.
No, but for some reason I thought this one did better than I expected, but whatever.
No, this movie did pretty horrible.
Okay.
It
Wow.
is. I would say it's Edgar Wright's only bomb. I mean, Last Night in Soho didn't do great, but that's because COVID. And whatnot.
Gotcha.
But this is, he had kind of proved himself with the first 2 Cornetto trilogy movies, and it was like, okay, this is the big one. We'll let you do what you want. Just, this is his push into like the mainstream. Even though he was kind of like on the outskirts of the mainstream,
Yeah.
this was supposed to be his big like,
Did
here
he,
I am, you
Did
know?
he like the comic series, or
I think
did
he was all in on all of this. I mean,
Okay.
you could
Well, I was
Research-
wondering like if he had discovered this graphic novel, or if it was just
yeah, that I don't
brought
know.
to him.
It doesn't strike me as something that was pushed on a director.
Right.
This Scott Pilgrim doesn't seem like this is such a huge comic, we have to make a movie
Right.
on
Yeah,
it.
I think
I have to.
Edgar Wright called Ryan Lee O'Malley So I think it was a choice. Universal pushed it, and Oni Media was the publisher of the comics and graphic novels. The whole format of graphic novels were growing in that time in Tokyo Pop. So there was a big rising. The comic itself was a paradigm shift almost, or a harbinger for times to come, or changes to come too. So it was revolutionary in its own right in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So yeah,
Gotcha.
I have a excerpt about that a little bit.
Go ahead.
So, on the phone from UK filmmaker Edgar Wright, he recalls that Scott Pilgrim was one of the only projects he's done where the project came to him. Almost everything else has been self-generated. So, he first heard about Scott Pilgrim in 2004 at a pre-release, an industry screening for Shaun of the Dead at Raleigh Studios. So then Adam Siegel and Jared LeBoff from Mark Platt Productions approached him, describing the project based on Brian Lee O'Malley's comic. So then he said, I think that's pretty accurate description of they said it's John Hughes meets Kill Bill. And he goes, I think that's pretty accurate description of the movie. And so it goes on that he really obsessed over it and wanted to make it. So
Okay.
All right, interesting.
So it was brought to him, but it ended up becoming this thing that Edgar Wright championed.
It wasn't that someone asked him to do it.
Yeah.
It was more like it planted a seed. Got it.
So yeah, the movie was not a success, but this miniseries is all about cult films that developed a following, and boy does Scott Pilgrim versus the World have a following. It's one of those often referenced movies online where it's like, oh, Scott Pilgrim's great. Like, you never hear a negative note about Scott Pilgrim online.
Yep.
And it is still a movie that gets brought up a lot in conversation.
Yeah.
So I have to imagine it's made its money back in, digital, Blu-ray, DVD sales. Like this seems like a movie that just keeps, making up lost ground over time. And
I can't tell you how many times I've heard someone say, bread makes you fat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Also, by the way, speaking of the relevance and how it just makes its way into all sorts of things, we were playing a very big video game recently where the characters are driving and she goes, you know what we are, right? And I goes, what? She goes, the L word. He goes, lesbians?
Yeah, I remember. I saw your video. That's Scott Pilgrim right there.
Yep.
No, it has lived on, and it has, I have to imagine, there's no number to associate with this, but I have to imagine it is more than ended up a profit for the studio. I think it was Universal that did this one. And it's one of those movies that I have to think that there have to have been sequel talk at some point, or at least some furtherance of the brand. And that's I guess what we're here for, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
So a little disappointing on the franchise front. There's been some recent developments. Edgar Wright has stated interest and is actually actively developing a somewhat follow-up to this, but it's not going to be in the live-action sense. It's, from what I can gather, a animated follow-up, so some sort of animation to kind of carry on the story of this. I don't even know if they'll be kind of capturing the likenesses of these characters. It may just be a completely different look and feel. They haven't given a bunch of information on that. That said, both Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Brandon Ruth have expressed interest in wanting to return to this property. I think they want to see like where these characters would be at this time.
Mm-hmm.
I heard certain things about the animated thing or the animated project is that it would kind of cover a Scott Pilgrim during like the COVID times, like where he would like have, I don't know, just be older and have like a beard or whatever.
Interesting. That's so weird.
I know. In addition to that, it was recently announced that Blake Lively would be directing a film called Seconds, which would be a semi-sequel or spiritual sequel to Scott Pilgrim. It's actually based off of O'Malley's comic, also called Seconds, which I don't know if it takes place in the same world, but there's like a connection to Scott Pilgrim there.
I'd love to see Ryan Reynolds as an X also. Just thinking about it.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. But that's interesting. Blake Lively, I don't know if go for it, I guess. Like,
Yeah.
let's see what happens.
Yeah, I like her. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I have to imagine, though, that if the opportunity came up for a live action sequel to this, Edgar Wright would be interested.
Yeah. There's definitely room to play.
Yeah, but that's purely speculative. If he's interested in doing this animated follow-up, you'd have to like think that, oh, if they threw him the money to do a actual sequel, he would do it.
Right.
Would y'all want to see a sequel to Scott Pilgrim?
I think
I
I
don't
would
think
end up
so.
wanting to go with the trend of turning things into TV shows or TV series. I actually really like the idea of an animated series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would work well.
Yeah.
Because if you wanted to bring characters back, you could do a little time traveling with that where
Question.
they don't really need to have aged so
would
much.
Would you do it in the likeness of the comic, or would you prefer it
Comic.
in the...
I would actually
comic.
like to see it in the likeness of the comic. Like, it doesn't have to be exact, but
would you
at
keep
least
these people as voice actors in the movie? Or would you
I would
want
be
something
okay with
different?
that.
It just depends.
Yeah, it does depend, but
like I haven't looked at the comics, so I don't know what any of the characters in that look like.
in my mind, I would want the live action to go untouched
Mm-hmm.
and pursue this world in an animated series because I think there's more room to experiment and play and basically relive those characters sort of in their glory days instead of trying to come up with a scenario where their agedness makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I'd be curious about both. Like, can they both
Yeah.
exist? Like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
just for fun.
Ooh, you know who might
Yeah.
be good? Joel McHale.
Yeah, he would
I
be
could
good.
see him.
I could definitely see him doing that. All right, any final thoughts on Scott Pilgrim, guys and gals?
I think that's a wrap.
All right, and we are closing the book on Irina's surreal cult classic coming of age
Yeah,
miniseries.
whatever it is. Yeah,
They are all that, though. I mean, you know, there you go.
they are.
So we had, starting from the top, oh man, I'm already blanking on
Jennifer's
Body.
Napoleon Dynamite.
No, Donnie Darko,
No.
Napoleon Dynamite, Sucker Punch, and Scott Pilgrim. Good
Yeah.
set of movies.
It's a good selection. I
I'll say,
think.
Irina, I think that yours is the first series where I think we had 2+ hour conversations on all 5 of them.
I think that's what cult classics will do because
Yeah,
there are very diverse opinions on
Even
them.
Sucker Punch, like, good for
Yeah.
that little movie. As much as it was not
To-
great, we
to
still were
create
able
a
to.
conversation.
Yeah, we still did it. And it comes back around to me now. I have the next mini-series, and it is the Deathloop mini-series, and we are starting with Source Code. Another Duncan Jones, probably because AJ had a Duncan Jones movie earlier on, and it inspired me to cover
Moon.
the other film that he likes, yeah, or that I like of his. So yeah, starting with Source Code, we'll lay it out later. You will know once that episode comes out, kind of what this whole series is going to do once we announce it at the end of that one. So, but yeah, looking forward to Source Code. Have y'all seen Source Code?
Nope.
Nope. Well,
Yeah.
I'll let you know
I've
on
seen
the
it.
next episode.
all right. Okay, with that said, goodbye, you guys and gals. Have a good night.
Bye.
Do you have any idea how long it took me to get all the Evil X's contact information so I could form this stupid league? Like 2 hours. 2 hours!